The sun had barely risen over the dusty sprawl of Ramadi, Iraq, but the heat was already a living thing. It pressed down on the cracked roads and half-destroyed buildings like a heavy, wet blanket. For the past 72 hours, a small, overworked medical team had been operating out of a bombed-out schoolhouse, trying to patch up the endless stream of wounded Iraqi police and civilians. The team's only nurse was a woman named Sarah Mitchell. She was not a soldier. She was a 34-year-old trauma nurse from Ohio who had volunteered for a 6-month humanitarian mission. Her uniform was a pair of dark green scrubs, now stiff with dried blood and dust. Her hands, usually steady as a rock, had begun to tremble from exhaustion and the constant bone-rattling thud of incoming mortar fire. She had a deep gash on her left calf from a piece of shrapnel that had torn through the wall the night before, and she walked with a noticeable limp, using an old broom handle as a cane. The schoolhouse had no running water, and the electricity was a fickle ghost that came and went. Sarah had just finished stitching a deep wound on a young boy's arm when the first crack of AK-47 fire snapped directly outside the window. Then came the scream, "Incoming! RPG!" She threw her body over the boy, covering his head as the wall behind them exploded inward. Dust and debris filled the air like a thick gray fog. When she looked up, she saw 3 Navy SEALs had materialized inside the room, their faces painted in dark streaks, their eyes wide with urgent fire. One of them, a huge man with a scar cutting through his right eyebrow, I grabbed her by the shoulder and shouted over the roar, "Take cover, get down! There's a wave of them coming from the east, 20, maybe 30 fighters." Sarah, limping heavily, dragged the boy toward a crumbling interior wall. She was not a fighter, she was a healer, and right now, she was trapped in a nightmare. The firefight that erupted was unlike anything Sarah had ever witnessed. The SEALs, there were only 4 of them, moved with a terrifying, fluid grace. They fired in short, controlled bursts, dropped empty magazines, and slapped new ones home without seeming to look. But for every fighter they dropped, 2 more seemed to appear from the labyrinth of alleys and half-fallen houses. The SEALs were not there to rescue Sarah. They were on a reconnaissance mission to locate a high-value target. And they had stumbled into the middle of a massive ambush. Their radio crackled with frantic, broken transmissions. They were being cut off from their extraction point. The squad leader, a man the others called Chief, slid over to Sarah. His voice was calm, almost gentle, which terrified her more than the shouting. "Ma'am, we're in a bad spot. We have wounded Marines pinned down 6 blocks north of here, a full squad. They're out of ammo and taking fire from 3 directions. We can't get to them, and they can't get to us." Sarah looked at the SEALs. They had enough ammunition for maybe another 30 minutes of heavy fighting. She looked at her own patients, 14 wounded civilians and 2 Iraqi police officers, all huddled against the back wall, their eyes wide with pure animal fear. Then she looked at her leg. The shrapnel wound had torn open again, and a warm trickle of blood was soaking into her left boot. She was useless. She was a liability. She whispered a short, desperate prayer to a God she wasn't sure she believed in anymore. That's when the sound cut through the chaos. It was not a gunshot or an explosion. It was a low, powerful thrumming, a rhythmic beating of rotor blades, but not the heavy chop of a blackhawk or the angry buzz of a little bird. This was different, deeper, more precise. The SEALs heard it too. The chief's eyes went wide, and a strange, disbelieving smile touched his lips. He keyed his radio and said just one word, "Angel?" From the east, where the sun was now a blinding white disk, a single MH-60 Black Hawk helicopter appeared. But it was not flying like a normal helicopter. It was flying like a furious, angry wasp. It skimmed the rooftops, no more than 50 feet off the ground, kicking up cyclones of dust and debris. Painted on its side, barely visible through the grime of war, was a call sign, Angel 6. This was no ordinary medevac bird. This was a gunship, a modified Dire Wolf variant, bristling with miniguns and rocket pods. And at the controls was a pilot the insurgents had learned to fear more than any airstrike. Her name was Captain Lena Voodoo Cross. She had been a commercial airline pilot before 9/11, a woman who could land a 747 on a frozen lake in a whiteout. Now, she flew the most dangerous missions in the most dangerous city on Earth. She saw everything from her cockpit: the burning vehicles, the running figures, the trapped Americans. Her voice came over the open tactical channel, calm as a Sunday morning. "Meg, ground elements, this is Angel 6. I have a visual on multiple hostiles. I count 18 enemy fighters converging on your position from the north, another 12 from the south. Stand by for gun runs." The SEALs looked at each other. "Stand by," one of them muttered. "We don't have time to stand by." But Lena was already moving. What happened next would become the kind of whispered legend that followed a pilot for the rest of her career. Lena did not just spray bullets wildly into the streets. She calculated. She breathed. She became one with the machine. Her first target was a trio of insurgents on a rooftop, setting up a heavy DSHK machine gun to fire down on the trapped Marines. They were behind a low wall, confident they were safe. Lena brought Angel 6 into a near-vertical hover, her rotors screaming in protest. Her minigun operator, a young staff sergeant named Dom, waited for her command. "Hold," she said. "Hold. Now." The minigun roared for exactly 2 seconds, 30 rounds. The 3 insurgents dropped. Not a single round hit the wall. It was a surgical cut. She banked hard, dropping low over a main road where a technical, a pickup truck with a mounted recoilless rifle, was racing toward the Marine position. The gunners in the back were laughing, firing wildly into the air. Lena did not fire her guns. She flew her helicopter directly at the truck, her landing skids only 10 feet off the pavement. The pilot of the technical panicked, swerved, and slammed into a concrete barrier, flipping the truck into a fiery wreck. She had not fired a single bullet. She had simply used her machine as a 2-ton psychological weapon. The SEAL on the ground, and watching through his scope, whispered into the radio, "Angel 6, you are insane. I love it." But Lena was not done. The most unbelievable shot was yet to come. The trapped Marines were in a 2-story house, their last stand. Insurgents had surrounded the building and were preparing to storm it from an adjacent alley. Lena could see them stacking up against a wall, waiting for the order to rush the door. There were at least 18 of them, packed tight. A rocket or a minigun burst would kill them all, but it would also bring down half the building and bury the Marines alive. She needed a different tool. She armed a single AGM-114 Hellfire missile. This was a missile designed to destroy tanks from miles away. She was less than 400 meters from the target. She was too close. The missile needed distance to arm itself and track a laser. She had no laser. She had only her eyes, her hands, and an impossible idea. She switched the missile to a manual, direct fire mode, something the manual said never to do. She aligned her nose with the alley. She saw the men raise their rifles. She saw one of them point up at her helicopter. She pulled the trigger. The Hellfire shot off its rail, not in a graceful arc, but straight as a spear. It crossed the distance in less than a second, flew between 2 buildings, and detonated exactly 3 feet above the heads of the stacked fighters. The shaped charge exploded downward. 18 men were killed instantly. The building holding the Marines didn't even shake. Over the radio, a Marine lieutenant's voice came through, shaky and broken. "Who? Who was that? Who just saved our lives?" Lena's voice returned, soft and steady. "Angel 6, now get your men out the back door. There's a hole in the wall 50 meters south. Move." And they did. Back at the schoolhouse, the SEALs were already on their feet, pulling Sarah and her patients toward the door. The chief grabbed her arm. "Move, nurse! We're leaving!" Sarah limped as fast as she could, her broom handle cane clattering on the rubble. Outside, the air was thick with smoke and the sharp, acrid smell of burnt propellant. The Blackhawk was descending into the street, its rotors kicking up a storm of sand. Lena's face appeared in the side window, a pair of aviator sunglasses pushed up into her helmet. She looked down at Sarah's bloody leg and the terrified civilians huddled behind her. "You only get 6 seats," Lena shouted over the engine. "Make it count." Sarah did not hesitate. She pointed to the 2 most critically wounded, a woman with a sucking chest wound and an old man with a shattered pelvis. Then she pointed to the 4 children. "These 6, she said. The SEALs loaded them aboard. The chief turned to Sarah. "What about you?" Sarah looked at her leg. The blood had soaked through her boot now, and the pain was a white-hot wire from her calf to her hip. She knew she was losing too much blood. She also knew that if she got on that helicopter, someone else would die. "I'll take the next one," she said. The chief stared at her for a long second. Then he reached into his vest, pulled out a field dressing, and tossed it to her. "You're tougher than half my team," he said. And then Angel 6 lifted off, carrying the 6 wounded into the hazy sky. Sarah watched them go, and then turned and limped back into the schoolhouse. There were still 8 patients left. She had work to do. 3 hours later, the fighting had died down to sporadic gunshots in the distance. Sarah had rebandaged her own leg with the field dressing the chief had given her, using a piece of broken chair as a splint. She had lost a lot of blood, and her vision was starting to blur at the edges. She was sitting on an overturned crate, holding the hand of an old woman who was whispering prayers in Arabic when she heard the sound again. The thrumming. She looked up, expecting to see a drone or another gunship. But this time, the helicopter that landed in the street was not Angel 6. It was a different Blackhawk, a medevac bird with a red cross painted on its side. The door slid open and a young crew chief jumped out. "Hey, Sarah Mitchell?" he shouted. She nodded, confused. "Ma'am, I have orders to extract you and your remaining patients. Priority 1. He handed her a folded piece of paper. It was a handwritten note, smudged with hydraulic fluid and what looked like gunpowder. It read, "A healer on the ground is worth more than 100 guns in the air, but a healer who bleeds for her patients is worth a whole army. Get on the bird. That's an order. Lena Cross, Angel 6. Sarah laughed, a hoarse, broken sound that turned into a cough. She folded the note carefully and tucked it into the pocket of her scrubs, right over her heart. Then she limped to the helicopter, helped the crew chief load the last of her patients, and climbed aboard. As the helicopter lifted off, she looked down at the ruined schoolhouse, the blood-soaked streets, the burning vehicles. She looked at the eastern sky, where a single black speck, Angel 6, was disappearing toward the horizon. She did not know if she would ever see Lena Cross again. But she knew one thing for certain. She had just witnessed the most incredible, impossible, and beautiful thing she would ever see in her life. And somewhere over Ramadi, a pilot named Voodoo smiled, turned off her missile safeties, and went back to work. There were always more people to save.